Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, especially with such knowledgeable, esteemed panelists on a very, very important topic. If you allow me, I'll start with just a few words about human-in-the-loop systems for us to understand the context to data work and data empowerment. And then you're going to hear from them. These are three experts who've been working in various aspects of data supply chains in relation to AI and other technologies for many, many years. So this is a panel about human in the loop. I'm a computer scientist. So when we talk about human in the loop systems, we talk about digital systems where a person, a human, is involved in a decision-making process. Now, this could be something very simple. Every time I tell my email client that an email that has been classified as spam is actually from a trusted source, that's a human-in-the-loop capability. Every time I am on Instagram and tell them that the ads they are showing me are not relevant or potentially offensive, I am carrying out a human-in-the-loop activity. All this feedback makes the AI algorithms that are pervasively used in every single digital tool of our age become better over time. Now, how do algorithms get smart? First of all, I think it's worth acknowledging that modern AI, the ChatGPT of this world, they can get quite smart without human input as such. They ingest huge amounts of data and they learn from it on their own. But that's sometimes not enough because algorithms still need lots of feedback from people, especially on topics that are new or topics that require lots of nuance, context, and expertise that only people can bring in. What does this have to do with data empowerment, which is the theme of the event today? Well, that feedback that I was talking about is data. And a lot of the technology providers that are seeking this feedback rely on gig workers to collect that sort of feedback at scale and refine their algorithms. Now, this is very different from a situation where myself, as a heavy Duolingo user, is providing feedback to machine translations from English to French. So this feedback is wrong, but me as a user of that app, I am empowered to contribute to these algorithms in whatever way I wish. It's also different from, say, Jack or Emma helping astronomers in Oxford discover new galaxies. Those scientists rely on that sort of feedback, and they seek out volunteers who can look at images and tell an algorithm what these images are about. We are talking here in this panel about the industry around these sort of feedback gathering loops. These are AI gig platforms that are a hidden part of the AI and hence the data supply chain. And we've heard before that this type of work creates new livelihoods. There's also opportunities for new forms of data agency or data stewardship and data governance. And there's also many underexplored risks and ethical questions. It's also a gray area when it comes to regulation. And as I'd like to put it, if AI data were a t-shirt or a sandwich, many of us would not touch it because we don't know what's inside and we don't know how those items have been put together. And with that, I am going to hand over to three great panelists, and I'm going to first ask them to briefly introduce themselves and their relation to human in the loop. And I'll start with Kauna. Welcome.
Thank you, Elena, for the opportunity. And I'm glad to be part of this great session and with amazing panelists. My name is Kauna Malgwi. I'm a chairperson for the African Content Moderators Union, Nigeria chapter. And I'm a former Facebook content moderator myself. I worked as a content moderator for 4 years. yeah, I'm glad to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Welcome. Maybe we'll go to Soujanya next.
Thanks for having me on this, Elena. Lovely to meet all of you. I am Soujanya. I work with Aapti Institute. We're a technology and policy research think tank based in India, but with long limbs, as I'd like to say. And I have been researching platform-mediated labor, but specifically labor for human in-the-loop systems like the one we're discussing, data annotation and such, for the past 4-5 years now. More recently, we're working with the belle of the ball, that is Karya, which is a labeling and annotation firm, again, based in India primarily, to understand what are the inputs and the making of a data worker, but also their conception of well-being and so on. Excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope we hear more about the belle of the ball and what the Aapti Institute has been doing in this space later on. And last but not least, Laurenz Sachenbacher, welcome.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. As Elena just said, my name is Laurenz. I'm a researcher at the Weizmann Institute in Berlin. And I think the reason why I'm here today is because I'm a core researcher in the Data Workers Inquiry Project, where workers around the world are inquiring their own working conditions to do exactly what Jack said, build counterpower based on counter data. And I can talk about it more later. I'm also very excited to be here.
Excellent. So I'm just going to start this off very, very slowly, expanding on your introductions. So tell us more about how data empowerment looks like for your field, for the type of role that you have and the projects that you've been involved with. And I'm going to start again with Kauna. You've told us a little bit about your work as a content moderator. Could you expand on that and on other activities and roles you've been involved in this space?
All right, thank you. Yeah, as a content moderator, it's been a tough journey. And yeah, I would say being a content moderator, first, it comes with the way you've been employed. Most of us were employed via deception, I would say, because we're told we're going to be call center agents, we're going to be translators for our individual, like local languages. For me, I was a content moderator for Hausa language, which is a northern Nigerian language. And when I started the interviews, I was told, you know, yeah, you're just going to review contents in Hausa to English. And yeah, the journey started. I got the job. And the week I started the job, that was when I realized I was going to work for Facebook. So it was a bit of mixed feelings, because if it's going to be reviewing contents, I didn't see, there was nothing alarming. But then we're given a non-disclosure agreement to sign. And in that non-disclosure agreement, I remember we're just put in a room, around 5 to 10 of us, and we're told, okay, sign this. And we signed a non-disclosure agreement, and we're never given a copy of it. But one thing I remember is I was going to be jailed for 20 years if I ever disclose I was working for Facebook. And that was the beginning of the whole roller coaster of emotions and exposure to toxic contents. Imagine the worst contents you've ever seen while scrolling on your Facebook page or Instagram. That is what we action, and we have 50 seconds to action each job or reported content. So we dealt with content around suicide, child abuse, exploitation, pornography, terrorist attacks, and all that. It was a very draining job, like Jack has earlier said when he was given the intro, that this job, it changes your life, and also the mental health toll it takes on you while doing the job, because you were never even prepared for it. You were never prepared for it. You were just exposed. You just got a job. You had a very little time of training, which was approximately 2 to 3 weeks. And most of the contents were blurred, you know, in black and white and all that. So you didn't really see the actual blood, the actual graphic innards of humans and all that you thought you would have seen while doing the work. And a few weeks after when we started the real job, now we started getting thousands and millions of toxic contents, which we have to filter off Instagram and the Facebook content. And that has been the job I've done for 4 years. And you can imagine the toll it has taken on me. But it's also a noble job in as much as it exposes you to a lot of things. It's a good job, it's a noble job, because we've saved a lot of lives. We've protected a lot of people, which can be you and I. We've protected us in so many ways because we've escalated terrorism content. We've escalated it to the FBI when kids are being extorted, sextortions and all that. These are the jobs we've done, but at what expense? Because that is the most important thing we should ask, because these are humans that do this job. We train the AI and the algorithm that, okay, if you see, for example, a word called kill or stab or beat, by the time 5 or 6 of our colleagues have actioned it and labeled it as a very bad word and should be pulled down, the next time the system or the algorithm sees that word, it pulls it down. So that is the work of training also the AI, which we've done. But the working conditions weren't favorable at all. Like I said, they took our voice by giving us a non-disclosure agreement. Nobody knew what we were doing. As foreigners who were brought from different parts of Africa to Kenya to do the job, most of us worked without work permits for months. We were arrested by police. You have to bail yourself. Talked about also the medical cover. It wasn't enough to cover for mental health care, because when we talk about this job, the major damage it does to you is your mental health. And that wasn't given a priority. You only have few workplace counselors who don't even understand what moderation is all about. So even the managers are also learning along with you. That is outsourcing companies are also learning along with you. They don't also want to see the content. Sometimes you call them, okay, come and have a look at what I just saw. I need some break. And they're like, no, don't you ever call me to see such a content. But this is what we do every day, and every 50 seconds that we need to submit one of these jobs. Talking about the Data Empowerment Fund, for us, it was a major win for us, because these conversations haven't been done. And even if it was done, we, the workers, were not even involved in those conversations. You hear people talking about AI, making of AI and all that, but the workers, the people who engage and interact directly with this whole tools are not being engaged. And for Data Fund, we are quite excited when we were part of this project to see that we're able to bring out those issues firsthand because of our own personal experience, and also to make research, because of course these NDAs, which is a non-disclosure agreements, make workers not to speak up. So there might be thousands of workers in a country doing that work, but you might never know because they've been given a non-disclosure agreement. For us, it's an opportunity for us to speak and talk about all these challenges that we, the data labelers, data annotators, content moderators, go through while doing the job. And we should also be recognized while doing the job. And we really felt recognized doing this Data Fund, because now we are able to contribute and also give our own part of a take, like to really say that, okay, if we're going this way, we feel that this is the way we should go because we've been there. This is how things were being done, and this is what needs to change, and this is what needs to be done better. Thank you.
Thank you. And I feel I should say thank you on behalf of all of us who are using these digital platforms as well. So next time when you see Meta's report where they say they are able to filter out 99% or a ridiculously high number of that content, this is the price for those types of results. So you alluded, Soujanya, in your introduction at a different world. So I was wondering if you could expand on that. So how does Karya and other platforms you've perhaps worked with at Aapti manage some of these challenges?
Happy to jump into that, but also just pick up a few threads from what Kauna very helpfully just highlighted, right? As she just said, often this work is noble work, but also to a vast majority of the data workers we've met, it is necessary work that one needs to do to earn a living, and which is perhaps true of the vast teeming millions of data annotation labor that you find located in rural India or even just peri-urban India, right? What is interesting is the paradox that that confounds India itself, which is in a country with a teeming, with millions of poor people, we also have a country where smartphone access is super high. Device is as cheap as like 50 pounds or less. Internet connection is mostly affordable to most people. So in a sense, having a phone, having internet access on your phone has opened up pathways to jobs and to thoughts and to ideas that were not there even half a decade ago. So it is in this context that you see a lot of people take up data annotation labor. But it's interesting because what we see as empowerment could vary for a lot of these workers, right? On the one hand, being able to participate in their households as earning members through wages that they earn from these platform arrangements is a big deal, mostly because a lot of the data annotation labor, whether in India or other parts of the developing world, like in Southeast Asia, in LATAM, in Africa, is still done by women. So in essence, data work has opened up newer ways for women to become economic agents and participate in their households. But also importantly, there is a question of skilling, which is that is data work or platforms like Karya tapping into latent skills that these people have? Are they draining them of their native knowledge, given that they want these workers to tap into their knowledge of local languages and so on, to be training complex algorithms that they may or may not be able to use it, right? So it's a question of empowerment then being able to derive value from the AI models that they're helping build. That's another important question. And very simply, a lot of data work comes with the threat of obsolescence, except this obsolescence goes both ways. It's obsolescence for workers because often they don't know that they're training a model that could automate a lot of the work that they themselves perform. But it's also obsolescence for businesses, whether it is in this question, Karya, or any other platform, because today you're offering image annotation services. Today, you're offering certain voice-based data set services, but there is a certain wall, there is a certain threshold beyond which this simple task will threaten to not matter so much anymore. So there is also retrospective pressure in that sense on both the workers as well as the companies in this space to think critically about sustainability, which is why questions like investing in skilling workers, questions like thinking a little bit more expansively about their own product lines and so on are important. So in that sense, to me, the question of data empowerment or empowerment of data workers specifically relates to three things, which is one, being able to get fair wages, because we know this in the most stellar example, OpenAI was trained by underpaid workers in Kenya, right? So what does fair wages look like? Because wages is necessarily an agent for empowerment for a lot of these workers. To what is the future of their work in this space? So the skilling question is an important one. And the third element of empowerment to me is being able to derive value from the data sets they produce, as well as the AI models that go on to build them. Just interestingly, and because Elena mentioned this, what Karya claims to do is that for every data set that is trained and built as a part of its workforce and so on, they promise to distribute royalties to workers. So for every data sets that are available, there is a licensing regime, and there is some plowing back, but also it is a fairly new model with just a growing workforce. So whether it is sustainable and so on remains to be seen. So that's just one very tiny example of value distribution, but hardly the best to quote.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we've already heard about some differences in different parts of the world, but also we've got a sense of just how complex this space is. So we're talking not just mental health and workers' rights, we're talking about the fact that at least in some parts of the world, the majority of gig workers are women. We're talking about the sustainability of the ecosystem of providers of such services, and potentially some ways forward. Laurenz, I'm gonna come to you now because I know you're involved in a very interesting project called the Data Workers Inquiry, which is addressing some of these challenges. I was wondering if you would mind telling us what you do, what the project is about, and what the way forward could be.
Yeah, of course. So I think based on what the other two speakers were just saying, it's become quite clear that when we talk about data work, there's like many issues, and I totally agree with what Soujanya said about the 3 forms of empowerment that we need to focus on. But generally speaking, I would say data workers are on the one hand precariously employed, and on the second hand politically dispersed or even actively enabled. That's like the 2 common grounds, irrespective of what we're talking about in the world. And based on this understanding, the Data Workers Inquiry is an attempt from a research perspective to generate data that is actively politicizing these issues. So we're like going into the workplaces, talking to workers themselves and giving them money and fair payment, talking about your first point, Soujanya, so that they can inquire their own working conditions themselves, based on the understanding that if they can politicize their own working places, get to have their voices heard, on the one hand, it's just like a measure and a question of fairness, but also it leads to better data, and it leads to, yeah, an improvement of the situation of the technologies that we all hinging on. As you said, Elena, we're using them on a daily, but we forget that the human labor behind this is so utterly essential. So it's about generating data from workers that is useful for workers. And by now we've had 15 different projects, different inquiries where the workers choose the research outputs themselves. The only requirement is that they're organized to some extent so that we don't get them into trouble. Like Kauna, for example, is going to be part of the second cohort, and I'm so incredibly excited to see what you're going to do in your research. But just to talk about an example of how this is turning out and how this is actually useful, is like I was responsible for the 2 projects in Germany, or like helping them. Like they're definitely the ones that retain the epistemic authority, which is one of the most important pillars of our self-understanding here. So they choose how to interpret their working conditions so that they can also politicize themselves. And both of these different, like it was one in Essen and it was one in Berlin. I'm not going to say the name of the companies because of the non-disclosure agreements that Kauna was talking about, but they each made a podcast. In the podcast realized, oh, our struggles are very similar, even though they're like hinge on the specificities of a locality, like different governments of the different counties within Germany have different labor laws. And then they started organizing together. And as we speak today, right now, or like maybe an hour ago, there was a letter of the workers handed to the European Parliament's left about specific proposals, how the Platform Workers Directive is supposed to be adapted according to the research findings they had about their own working conditions. So it's basically a project that tries to empower workers through data, and through the betterment of the working conditions also helps all of us have better and fairer systems, because with systems that are so unfairly trained, as Kauna described, with all the psychological toll and whatnot, the quality of the data is also suffering. So it's also definitely about undercutting secretive practices of both the platforms, which have like bad instructions, as we've heard, or like the general makeup of the infrastructure is set in a way where the workers themselves can't even like complain about unfair practices because they're like, there's just like a wall on some level where they're not being heard any longer. Or if we have like an outsourcing firm, they're called business process outsourcing firms, then we have like all these legal repercussions and non-disclosure agreements where like one of the workers' friends that we're working with got fired because they talked about their plights in the German Bundestag. And a combination of all of this is what we try to do and bridge within the project. So we have like many different projects, and we realize the problem is way bigger than we thought, but we also are currently finding international commonalities that then always have to be made sense of within the local specificities, and the people who know best are the workers themselves. That's why they retained epistemic authority, as I said.
Thank you for this. And this whole conversation reminded me a little bit about some of the practices that are emerging in academic research. So I'm a computer scientist. So at this point, I should say that myself and my team, we are what is called requesters on these platforms. So some of the things we do, and I know many colleagues in the communities who are using these practices, is to start with, we would always have or seek ethics approval from our institutions for the type of work. Many universities around the world are introducing specific processes for when we are using these sort of services and capabilities in our research, for instance, to create a data set to train a machine learning model. We are also encouraged by our ethical board to pay above minimum wage in the UK rather than where we are based, rather than the countries where we are recruiting the contributors. We're also creating, and the community itself is creating, channels to talk to the contributors about some of the answers that they have provided. And we're doing active research to understand why some of the contributions that people have provided on these platforms may be of a different quality than the one we expected. And very often, it turns out that what we're asking, the questions that we're asking these contributors to answer, are badly formulated. We are not able ourselves to sort out those answers and provide those contributions in the time allocated or at the level that we would expect in theory. So there's a whole world out there of things that could be done, but of course we in academia are not the main players in this space. And no matter how much we would advocate with bigger platforms to provide these sort of services to change their practices, we can go only that far. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about a way forward. So before we move to audience questions in a few minutes, we've already heard some very promising initiatives, but my feeling is also from hearing your stories that the road ahead is long. So before we move to audience questions, if I may ask each of you, and maybe I'll start with Laurenz first and up in the other order, to just share a few thoughts about what is it next to change the status quo.
Oh, that's a huge question.
Oh my God. Okay.
No. I understand. I understand. I just want to say that I can only answer it within a tiny scale, because I think it's important to talk about the specificities before talking about the general trend, because it's a new topic. And if I were to talk about the German context, where I know the most, it's very important to talk about the role of the unions as of today, because we do have legislation in place that's like trying to better things, specifically on the European level with the Platform Workers Directive from the beginning of this year. where we now have a presumption of employment and it's bettering things to some degree, but it's still hinging on national legislation to take effect. And in this, the unions play a big role in actually advocating for workers' powers and also helping them to make their voices heard. And the experience of the workers that I've been in contact with as of right now is that the unions are very slow to adapt and that this needs to change drastically. And that, for example, Verdi, one of the biggest unions that is also very responsible in this context, had the people in Essen and the people in Berlin were all each grouped in a different group from Verdi's side because they didn't understand the field. And on one side, there were tech workers, and on the other side, there were call center workers. And before our project started, they didn't know that they were both organized in one of the second largest union in the entire country. So we have like a problem of bureaucratization and different groupings that leads to undercutting the political power that the workers already have. So I think what definitely needs to change is that we need to adapt the institutions that are meant to be there for workers to realize what these changes in the working world nowadays actually amount to, and that it's becoming less like based within specific companies or specific places, and that questions of worker power are also a question of like accounting for the fact that the problem is on an international scale and we need international answers that then are made sense of in local context. And I think the starting point in Germany and Europe is the unions, from what I know so far.
Thank you. And Germany, obviously, and Europe have generally a very strong union culture. Kauna, I will come to you next. Any possible solutions or way forward, very briefly, before we move to audience questions?
Okay, just like Laurenz have said, there's no clear, way to say there's a way forward as it is right now, but we're trying out possible avenues for us to first build power and build a community, because the work is usually an individualized kind of work where workers are not allowed to even, meet up with other people outside of the workplace because of the non-disclosure agreement. So these are most of the challenges that we've had, but so far we've pushed and really trying to build the African Content Moderators Union. But we've met a lot of challenges as well, because we sued Sama, which is our outsourcing company, and Facebook since last year, March 2023. And the case have been, going on and on, issues of jurisdiction and all that, because they claim they are not physical in Kenya. They cannot be sued and trialed in Kenya, and all those legal delays and terms. But we are trying to see how we can form communities and form power among the workers. But the union itself usually face a lot of a backlash, because even the government feels like, okay, these big tech companies are bringing work to Africa, they are bringing work to Kenya, why are you driving them away, and all those. So the union, it's been over a year, we've not even gone anywhere with the union. We just received a feedback last month where they said, okay, you can just join an existing union, which is quite tricky, joining an existing union, because this form of job is different, it's unique, its challenges are different. And, there's a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to the issues of workers as well. And most of the time is political as well. And we, the workers who really understand our work and what we want from the employers, are not given the opportunity and try to be put under with, already existing unions who are very slow, just like Laurenz have said. They don't even know what, the first time we met, even the union that was suggested by the government we joined, they don't even know what moderation is. And up till today, we're still trying to explain and to make them understand these are the issues. So these are the things that we face, but I think the way forward is the step that we're doing right now, is to talk about it, to advocate for it, to bring the awareness to even the government, the African governments and countries also, to know that there are issues when it comes to this tech work. For example, Facebook, when we filed a case in Kenya, they moved their moderation job to Ghana. And who knows, if there's another pressure in Ghana, they might move to Nigeria, so they keep moving. So we need a global and international laws that can hold these big tech companies accountable wherever they are, so as to also make the workers have not the best, but at least to be recognized and also get fair minimum wages, get paid and all that. Yeah, I'm being fast because of the time.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, the stories that you're sharing are so rich and powerful, and it's, you know, I really want everyone to listen to what is happening, because as you're saying, we need more awareness in this types of fora like here, but also more broadly. I am going to go to Soujanya next, and then I do promise we will take some audience questions.
I'll keep it really short. Thanks, Elena. The future of data work and what empowerment for data workers looks like is a fraught one, mostly because in a lot of contexts, the modalities of engagement with these workers are not apparent. They can be in a BPO, they can be in remote India and dispersed everywhere. So I think being able to demand certain legibility on the part of platforms should be the first focus, whether for regulation or just from a broader perspective of platform accountability, right? Basic information about the number of data workers you engage, the type of work they're doing, what is their status of inclusion, do they have their phones, do they pay for their own electricity? All of these are important considerations. And very simply also wage information about wages, right? How is it calculated? Are they paid hourly? Are they paid on a salary basis? And so on are all information that is kept under lock and key, unlike with a regular gig worker who has still some understanding of how they earn, and it's also well governed. The data work and labeling market is widely, it's the wild, wild west. So to think of ways to demand openness and legibility on the platform should be the first goal. And the other one is to also bring in some standards around both wages as well as the terms of contract with which workers engage with these firms and platforms, right? Kauna was very candid in speaking about her experience with the NDA, and this is not inconsistent with research that is coming out from, say, the Data Workers Inquiry or academics like Julian Posada, who speak about how even the lack of transparency in how they evaluated, assessed, and often thrown out of platforms is also a disempowering paradigm that they contend with. The last thing I will leave you with, and particularly on the question of wages, is that sometimes they're not paid at all in cash for the work they do, mostly because it's complex. Some of these arrangements are cross-border payments. Workers are expected to get PayPal, which is hardly a straightforward mechanism. I took 4 business days to get PayPal up and running for myself, and I own an iPhone, and like clearly I'm of a different import, right? So imagine this of smaller workers. It's challenging, but worse yet, there have been cases where platforms like Amazon have paid workers with gift cards, which is just going to prop up their own monopolies to begin with. So that's just a tip of the iceberg, but speaks about the importance of thinking critically about some of the fundamental labor questions that befound any space, right? Which is fair wages, fair contracts, and so on. But yes, we do rely on the work of excellent researchers, whether at DARE or the Data Workers Inquiry, and so on, to build this work, and want to also take this opportunity to do a huge shout out to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will now do what I promised, and I will hand back to our studio to take some of the questions from the audience. Thank you for listening so patiently.
Thanks, Elena, and that amazing conversation led by our panellists there. That was just brilliant. Now, my colleague Jo Healy has joined us in the studio, and Jo's been monitoring the questions coming in from you in the audience. So, Jo, what are people asking?
Thanks, Emma, and thanks to everybody who's been posting questions. So, question number 1. This question is a bit meta, but what role do data rights have in ensuring fair work for data workers? For example, workers having the right to access data that platforms hold about their tasks, pay, and experiences.
Excellent. So we've heard in the last intervention actually about some of the statistics that we would like published. So those should be a good segue into answering this question. Who would like to go first? Soujanya, may I just then hand this to you because you had already started down this route?
Absolutely. So one of the bigger concerns is often the workers have little to no understanding of the purpose of the work they're doing, right? So they know that they're being given or sent images to be annotated or words and pages to be read out, but there is no understanding of the AI supply chain or the value chain in which this work is being fed to. Worse yet, in cases where harmful work like content moderation is involved, they're actively prevented from seeking support, either via in-house doctors and psychiatrists or with external parties because there are confidentiality agreements and so on. So I think workers do have a right to know why is their data being collected, how is their data being used, and which in a sense is like at the heart of conversations around informed consent itself, whether in the context of this or broadly in the context of stewardship and data governance itself. But to also know that to be able to reject and withdraw from working for certain entities that have been at the forefront of disturbing developments should also be something that the workers should have a right to. Often, platforms hide behind a very patronizing, assumption, which is that workers, with little to no idea of English or with no access to laptops and so on, are not going to understand AI. But that is hardly justifiable to deny them a right to know the terms and conditions of their work. So that's just one part. Yes, the question of transparency is at the heart of workers' empowerment, but also simply being able to hold platforms accountable, whether it is regular gig work platforms or platforms that employ data annotation labor, would demand certain mandated data sharing from these platforms. And I think that is a big piece that regulation needs to pick up around the world.
Thank you very much for this. And we know of some areas where this was possible. And for those in the audience who are computer scientists like me, there's many tools we could build to make it easier for Kauna, content moderators around the world, data workers, data labelers, to be able to collect some of this information that they need to make the case and provide the evidence a bit faster. I'll take another question, if I may.
Great, thanks, Elena. Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, I think, expands on what we've just discussed. Are there opportunities for full AI supply chain transparency, covering the organisations involved at all stages of model development and transparency regarding data practices, labour rights, etc.? How could we make this happen?
All right. Kauna, would you like to speak a little bit about this?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the AI supply chain, it starts from my own understanding as a worker, is even the transparency from recruitment down to from interview, recruitment, signing the contract, the terms of the work, and how the work is made to be. Because like you said, there's no way. When I Googled content moderation, when I got my contract, I didn't get any information. What I saw was just review contents. That was all. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around awareness and also to really define what this is. But I think it begins also from legislation down, because the platforms and the big tech companies often hide behind the gaps in the labor laws of countries, and also those thin lines where there is no clear definition of even an employer and an employee in this digital era. You know, it's still the definitions in, especially in Kenya and most of these African countries, is still the traditional employer-employee relation, where you have to come to a physical office, you need to work on physical files and all that. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, starting from even the whole structure and the laws and the policies that defines even work and how decent work can be in this current digital era. I think that will go a long way in really holding most of these big firms accountable. And when it comes to also what would I say, there's no clear definition of work also, because work can be in different forms, remote, virtual, you know, all those needs to also be defined in this current digital world, where it's really clear. Even if you work in Kenya, you work in the US, you work in Germany, there should be a kind of way that all this big tech know clearly what an employer means, what an employee means, regardless of where you follow. Is it an outsourcing company, freelance, or whatever you call it? But those definitions are coming out very clear. I think that's the first basis. And when it comes to pay, I love what you said earlier, Elena, around minimum wage. Most of these things comes in the hiding of minimum wage. In Kenya, I work as a content moderator for Facebook. I'm paid less than $2, around $1, $1.2, while my own colleagues who do the same job as I do, log in on the same platform in the US, in Europe, might get over $20 or even 30 or more. So how do we put a balance between all this? Because these people might think they're in the US, you know, the big tech companies, but they work across globally. So how do we define all this, and how do we put all these things into perspective?
Thank you very much. And I am actually, this is so interesting and so rich that I did think whether we should just continue this conversation and hijack the whole event, because I'm sure lots of people are interested. And I know we have even more questions that unfortunately we will not be able to go through. But we have planned so many other topics for you today, including some presentations from the projects funded through the Data Empowerment Fund. So with that, I'm going to thank my panelists, and I'm going to tell you out there who are all heavy social media users to go and ask those digital services that you're using how they are making those capabilities possible. The pressure that we can put as a community can help some of the measures and actions that we have heard about today. Because at the end of the day, we want to get in this space exactly, or to be better than in other areas that I had mentioned earlier. So think about food safety, think about retail, think about many other areas where some progress has been made. We need to ask those questions every time we scroll down our posts before we go to bed. And with that, I'm going to hand over to the studio. Thank you very much for being here. And I wish you all a great event.